In the ever-changing landscape of professional football, the 1950s and early 1960s marked a crucial period of defensive innovation, driven by the rising complexity of offensive strategies. As offenses expanded their passing games and diversified formations, defenses were forced to adapt beyond traditional man-to-man schemes. The NFL in the 50s was considered the Wild West of professional sports, but unlike previous decades, its colorful style began to evolve into a new league with more complex schemes and philosophies. The 52 Eagle was the dominant front in the early 1950s, with 5 down linemen and 2 linebackers. The linebackers' job was to jam tight ends as they released off the line, which helped slow down the passing game and funnel receivers into crowded areas. 4 defensive backs were an innovation at the time, and their main job was to cover intermediate routes, often in a loose zone. The 52 Eagle, though strong against the run, had a natural weakness: a hole in the middle of the field. Offenses started to adapt by pulling tight ends off the line and using more slot formations, making it harder for linebackers to jam them. This forced defenses to get creative. Coaches began pulling the middle guard off the line, having him drop back a couple of yards and play in a 2-point stance, essentially inventing the middle linebacker role and moving toward a 43 front. Bill George, who played for the Chicago Bears starting in 1952, is widely credited as the NFL's first true middle linebacker and a pioneer who revolutionized the position. Originally, George played as a middle guard in the standard 5-man defensive line. His role on passing plays was to bump the center and then drop back into coverage. But during a 1954 game against the Philadelphia Eagles, George noticed that his routine of hitting the center first allowed the quarterback to easily throw short passes over his head. Deciding to innovate, George skipped bumping the center and dropped back immediately into pass coverage, disrupting the passing lanes. Shortly after, he intercepted a pass, changing how the position was played forever. In the early 50s, Steve Owens, the New York Giants defensive coordinator, created a unique style called the 6-1-4 alignment. This innovative defense had defensive ends dropping back into pass coverage, essentially becoming outside linebackers, while occasionally the middle would move back once the play started. But it wasn't until Landry took over that he evolved this concept into an institution. The New York Giants under Landry was the first to make the 43 their base defense in 1956. Landry forced a player to stand in the middle of the field on just about every play. This gave them a true middle linebacker, Sam Huff, who could drop into coverage and help close the hole in the middle, while the 4 defensive linemen could still pressure the run and pass.
For years, the Bears-Giants game in New York. A Bears pass is intercepted by Huff of the host pros. The Giants had
zone coverage required linebackers and defensive backs to work together, passing off receivers and adjusting their depth based on the offensive play. Defenses started using 2 deep safeties more often as the passing game evolved, but the coverage was still pretty basic compared to today. The idea of splitting the field into 2/3, what we now call cover 3, was just starting to take shape. The move from the 52 to the 43 fronts, the emergence of the middle linebacker, and the increasing use of zone coverage were all direct responses to evolving offenses. The chess match between offensive innovation and defense adaptation in the 50s set the stage for the complex zone schemes we see today in football. In the 50s, deep zones were rare, and zone coverage was more about clogging up the short and middle areas because teams didn't have that generational speed. If you look at the stats, the numbers will confirm this. Look at the 1950s. Up until the 1957 NFL Championship, it was clear a huge change. Over the next few years, the numbers began to continue to increase each year. Now, believe it or not, Tom Landry was one of the innovators of the zone defense. The flex philosophy is actually a collection of zone concepts. His schemes layered man and zone coverage principles. Defensive linemen and linebackers were assigned specific gaps and zones on the field to control rather than simply engaging directly with blockers and man-to-man combat. Landry taught his players not to chase, but to keep containment. The flex defense combined both run-stopping strength and pass coverage versatility. It balanced that shaped future zone systems like the Tampa 2 and others. Keep in mind, most of these zone early innovations were to attack the rushing game on offense, not necessarily the passing game. But understanding who created the zone schemes in the passing game is a little bit more complex. Sid Gilman, considered as the godfather of the modern-day passing game. Gilman saw the deep pass as a philosophy instead of a treat, while coaches like Lombardi focused on zone runs. It was Gilman who defined the era in the skies, creating what we now know as the aerial attack. The innovation of the passing forced teams to create passing zones that stretched further back. This forced more evolution on the defensive side of the ball. Jerry Williams was a defensive backs coach for the Philadelphia Eagles in the late 1950s through early 1960s. He was credited with inventing the nickel defense.
Standing. What an electrifying finish to a great season and a great game.
Adding a fifth defensive back to counter-passing offenses. His innovations laid the groundwork for defending multiple receivers and zones in the secondary. The nickel defense helped stifle the offense and the passing game. Although the zone philosophy was there, the league still lacked the generational talent of receivers who had the speed to put up generational numbers and break the nickel defense. But that changed when a future news anchor dominated the league and put up numbers we've never seen before. Frank Clarke was the first major deep threat in Cowboys history. In just a matter of 4 years, Clarke dominated his position.
Clarke, the Steelers are completely fooled, and Frank races in to give the Cowboys a quick score. It's 7-0 Dallas.
Becoming one of the best receivers in the game, his speed and athleticism forced two deep safeties in the field more often than ever before. The nickel defense was primarily a short yardage or third down package rather than a base defense. The rest of the defense maintained a heavier front, 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, emphasizing run defense alongside pass coverage. The safeties were a lot closer to traffic. That scheme was not ready for Clarke. In 1962, Clarke put up video game-like numbers. He had 14 touchdowns and 22.2 receptions per catch in just 13 games. That same year was the only year since 1955 where just one receiver in the league had less than 20 yards per reception. Think about this. In 1962, Frank Clarke had 9 touchdowns. His average catch per touchdown was a mind-boggling 43 yards. A year later, he had 14 touchdowns. His 14 touchdowns were an average of 33.9 yards per reception. That's amazing. 7 of his 14 touchdowns were 30 yards or more. He was a rare talent. He was bigger than Michael Irvin, but faster. The league had to find a way to control this phenomenon.
The Cowboys was the sensational season of Frank Clarke. Frank takes a Don Meredith pass against the Redskins. Frank shakes off 2 Indian defenders, then hightails it to the end zone for one of his 14 touchdowns.
Or he was going to break the record books. 14 touchdowns in just 12 games was unheard of, so they started to move their safeties and corners back. If you notice, his receptions per touchdown started to decrease by the end of that 1962 season. During his peak in 1962, with 14 touchdowns, many of his touchdowns were very long receptions, several over 40+ yards and even 80 yards. By the end of that season and into 1963, the average yards per touchdown reception dropped significantly as defenses adjusted to Clarke's deep threat ability. Look at 1963. Most of his touchdowns were shorter routes, often under 25 yards, showing defenses were forcing Clarke into shorter gains rather than big explosive plays. This decline in average yards per touchdown, while he continued to score, shows the league adapting to limit his long touchdown receptions by tighter coverage and strategic defensive adjustments. Despite this, Clarke still remained a consistent scorer and offensive weapon, though with fewer big play touchdowns than earlier seasons. Landry's philosophy was really aggressive at this time. Clarke had elite talent, but elite speed couldn't outrun cornerbacks playing 10 yards off and safeties 15 yards deep. But you know, Landry, Brandt, and Schramm, these guys were different. They never wanted to stay the norm. Clarke was fast, but what if we broke the mold? Instead of just drafting the best, fastest receiver, what if we went out and drafted the fastest human the world has ever seen?
When Mr. Hayes gets going, the X-15 couldn't catch him. Bob Hayes wins the 100.
When Hayes showed up, the entire system collapsed, and whatever zone coverage was there to stop Clarke needed an entire makeover. In 1964, the Cowboys, led by Tex Schramm, Gil Brandt, and Tom Landry, had a reputation for unconventional scouting, often targeting athletes with extraordinary physical abilities from non-traditional backgrounds. Hayes caught their attention not only for his track accomplishments, but also for his documented love of football at Florida A&M. The Cowboys reached out early to assess his interest in an NFL career, speaking with college coach Jay Gaither to confirm that football was Hayes' true passion. They would find out that Hayes wasn't a track runner. He was a football player who ran track. In 1964, the NFL permitted teams to use a future draft pick on players who still had college eligibility. The Cowboys used their 7th round draft pick to select Hayes, a move that was widely questioned because no Olympic sprinter had ever succeeded in pro football before.
The most obvious Cowboy newcomer was Bob Hayes, whose thrilling exploits made him one of the game's top attractions in his rookie year.
In Hayes' first season, he was slotted as a split end in Tom Landry's offense.
Here, Hayes runs under a 50-yarder from Meredith. His reflexes and fine hands account for this touchdown.
The team's philosophy shifted slightly from how they used Clarke in years past. Landry began to build passing concepts designed exclusively to exploit Hayes' deep speed. He did do this with Clarke, but Clarke was a phenomenal route runner. Landry had the privilege to design routes to get him open down the field because Clarke could run those routes. He handled Hayes quite differently. During training camp, Hayes was told to go vertical and beat his guy. That's it. It wasn't a lot of complex designs for Hayes. Early in his career, they wanted to keep the scheme simple for him and allow him to use his athleticism without too much mental effort. Ironically, early in training camp, the Cowboys didn't know how raw Hayes was. Hayes had issues running the deep pass. He struggled with reading what the defense was doing. The NFL had came a long way since the 52 defense. Clarke was one of the huge reasons for high safeties and prevent defenses that a lot of teams were running at the time. So being the stand-up guy Clarke was, he took the young legend under his wing and taught him the nuances of the deep game. They sat and watched film for hours on the go and post patterns that would maximize Hayes' speed. Beyond physical drills, Clarke helped Hayes understand defensive coverages and how to read the positioning of safeties and corners. He taught Hayes to identify when a defender was vulnerable and how to time his burst so quarterbacks could anticipate and deliver the ball deep. But before training camp ended, Hayes knew how to read the positioning of safeties and corners. Hayes knew how to identify when a defender was vulnerable and how to time his burst so quarterbacks could anticipate and deliver the ball deep. Because not only was he a savvy deep route runner, his technique along with his world-class speed allowed him to run right by his defenders no matter how far they were. Once Hayes figured it out during the regular season, he was a nightmare.
Meredith finds Hayes open and hits him with a bullet. Controlling his speed, he shows the moves that only the great receivers have. And it's full throttle thrust for the goal line. In the year of the rookie in the NFL, Hayes' star was one of the brightest.
The league had never seen this speed before. In his first 2 games, Hayes caught a 45-yard touchdown in back-to-back games. But it wasn't until his 4th game ever that he finally broke the mold.
He's going to throw. He's going for Bob Hayes. Hayes on the post pattern, juggles the ball and still has it. Hayes will score easy, and Greg Morton going to the outside to Bob Hayes. Hayes does a little dance, gets away from Morgan and gets out to the 35. The throw, going across the middle. This is Hayes again. Hayes gets away from Scarpati, stays on his feet, and finally Ramsey makes a tough tackle. Hayes with the ball. Bob Hayes trying to get a block and gets away from one man. Finds some room on the sideline, down over the 40-yard line, down to the 30. Finally run out of bounds by Claude Crabb. Oh, he's looking for Hayes on the outside maneuver. Hayes gets away from Mike Morgan and out over the 25, the 28-yard line, and Ramsey knocks him out of bounds. Back on their 18, and that's a shotgun formation. Rome throwing, and it's knocked by Irv Cross, and Bob Hayes has the ball. Bob Hayes down to the 40, down to the 30. He's going to go all the way. Deflected aerial.
In week 4, he had 177 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had an 82-yard touchdown and a 49-yard touchdown. Now, think about this. In his first 4 games, he had touchdowns of 45, 45, 49, and 82. In that season alone, he had 8 touchdowns of 45 yards or more. Look at this, and tell me these numbers aren't Randy Moss-type numbers. 3 receptions for 103 yards. Or here, 3 receptions for 94 yards. He had 12 touchdowns and 1,000 yards in 13 games. Those deep corners and safety schemes that teams used against Clarke didn't work on Hayes. Hayes just went right by them. After that 1965 season, it was apparent that Dallas had a legend on their hands. In '66, the NFL had to approach Hayes totally different. Instead of just playing deep against him like they did the previous year, they now evolved an old concept into a new one: bump and run zone defense. For the first time, defensive backs tried to press a receiver at the line of scrimmage. Not only did they press Hayes, but they also had two safeties over the top. Despite these efforts, Hayes often outran defenders after the initial bump due to his ability to accelerate rapidly and maintain top-end speed. He was able to catch the 50-50 balls in deep coverage consistently, but because the league evolved so rapidly against Hayes, the zone defense forced Landry to improvise and change up his concepts and philosophies.
You know, people fail to realize that when you find a zoning team, they're not 100% a zoning team. They're about 80, and sometimes, that other 20% you can drop the bomb.
In the mid-60s, Landry had a high-powered passing offense. But because of the zone defense, Landry created what's called now as the multiple offense.
We do have the most complicated offense in the league, mainly because we use so many different formations. But we run identical to the same plays that every other team in the league run, but we have to always think a little ahead of the other club because we have so many different situations that are faced in different defenses.
Well, actually, our philosophy doesn't change. We use a multiple formation set, a lot of movement, and we've got to attack their man-to-man coverage because they use 50% man-to-man on passing down, which is extremely high for any team done.
He used motion more frequently to find out if the defense was in zone coverage. If the back followed the receiver, they were in man. If no one followed, they were in zone. A lot of times, he ran the ball based on that concept. In fact, Landry became more of a running concept coach than a passing one.
There are geniuses in coaching. He would have to be recognized as one of them because he was very innovative. The multiple offensive sets, the motions, the shifting, he pioneered in that area.
Take a look at this play. Dallas is in what looks like a T formation. If you notice, the player in the middle is not a running back, but the wide receiver, Lance Rental. Watch how Landry sends him in motion. Keep in mind, Rental was one of the best receivers in the league. Landry figured that by sending Rental into motion, the move was going to garner attraction. And boy, was he correct. The motion drew the attention of two defenders, the cornerback and the safety. What this did was open up the middle of the field for Hayes on what's called a combination pattern. The quarterback missed him though. Unfortunately, it wasn't a touchdown.
Dallas relies on a lot. He has other receivers figuring in there, and he keyed his weak safety. The weak safety come off of Hayes, and he goes to Hayes down the middle. That safety does not have any help.
He also moved Hayes around a lot, whether it was in a slot, outside, or the backfield. Landry's genius football IQ unarmed the bump and run in just a matter of years. Bob Hayes, to me, is the reason why Landry's multiple offense dominated like it did, because it was a more balanced approach. Not only did you have to respect the run, but you couldn't sell out on the run because the fastest man in the world was on the field. When you look at the real track runners, and I mean the speed guys, the real speed guys, no one was dominant in two sports like Hayes. He wasn't just a special package guy who played only on third downs. He didn't just come in on deep passing downs either. He was a phenomenal receiver who could run the route tree with exceptional hands and balance. The complete package. Hayes had a legendary Hall of Fame career, and you can't write the history of the evolution of the NFL zone defense without the legendary Bob Hayes. He alone is credited with influencing the creation of the modern zone defense. Until next time, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And as always, thanks for watching.